Chapter 2. The Vegan Line. Sasha. From Lyra we move to Vega, and as you will see, vegan characteristics actually planted the seeds for the challenges and characteristics of other members of your galactic family. As we mentioned, Lyrans chose to express more of their masculine energy, especially in the early eras. However, groups within the Lyran lineage that didn't really connect with masculine energy and wished to live a different way. They wanted a more spiritual, inwardly focused existence. These groups migrated to star systems in the direction of the star Vega, as seen from Earth. This was the beginning of the Vegan lineage. At first, these very early Vegans attempted to explore more of the feminine expression, or what they believed was a focus on spirituality. They developed a number of spiritual practices, including meditation, because they wanted to go back home to the lake, so to speak. But something very interesting happened that became a detour on their road home. After generations sought to connect with feminine energy, they started to split internally, splitting the mind and the heart, or the masculine and the feminine. Instead of a balanced expression of the duality of the universe, they focused on the mind, deluding themselves into thinking it was a true spiritual path. They believed perfection of the mind and eradication of emotions would bring them spiritual perfection. Their beliefs about the role of emotion were flawed, and this split widened over generations. When we talk about emotions, we include the capacity of the heart to love. If you push down negative emotions, you also push down the heart's capacity to love. This is what happened with the Vegans. They became extremely mentally focused and emotionally dry. The icon you know as Mr. Spock from Star Trek is a perfect example of Vegan consciousness. They channeled all the passion and excitement natural to biological beings to the mental body. It is from this condition that the Zeta beings, whom we will address shortly, established their foundation. The upside was that the Vegans developed an innate ability to connect with natural spirituality, similar to Japanese Shintoism and other indigenous spiritual orientations that revere nature. Throughout the galactic family, there is a spiritual system we call Vegan mysticism that has influenced nearly every group in the galactic family, including Earth. Shintoism is just one of the Earth's spiritual systems influenced by Vegan mysticism. Vegans had a tremendous capacity for spiritual connection, but when they began to create the split between heart and mind, the downside revealed itself. This split spread through many other galactic civilizations all the way down to Earth. You might ask why this happened. There are two aspects of that question we wish to answer. There is the little y, the microcosm, and the big Y, the macrocosm. The macrocosmic answer has to do with the Golden Lake and its original intention to experience separation. Fragmentation is a masculine act. Therefore, all the journeys of your galactic family are tainted with masculine energy, which leans toward separation. This archetype affects all aspects of creation. The act of separation is masculine, and the act of integration is feminine. It is hard to connect with the process of integration while still clinging to separation. The little y, or the microcosmic interpretation, is that even though they focused on spirituality, which is inherently male-female balanced, they were still influenced by the big directive from the One. That directive compelled them to experience the masculine energy of separation. This led them to believe that if they could just refine their mental bodies, the source of masculine energy as they saw it, they could progress more spiritually. The irony is that they still displayed Lyran characteristics, but in their inner selves rather than in their society. As time went by, they fooled themselves into thinking they were more spiritual, but they had just recreated the Lyran dynamic in their own way. Question: why did the metaphorical Golden Lake want to experience separation? When you are fully integrated as the Golden Lake is, there is no movement. It is completely still. It is both the beginning point and the end. We Pleiadians believe that the flow of the universe moves like a Mobius or an infinity symbol, much like an in-breath and an out-breath. The universe goes through cycles of separation and integration. Everything is paradoxical because these seemingly opposite states exist simultaneously, but the human mind can now only perceive one at a time. As you spiritually evolve, you will be able to perceive your dual nature without experiencing the discomfort of the paradox. It isn't that the Golden Lake wanted to experience separation. It was just part of the cycle. This separation can be a key for growth. You are still the lake. You will always be the lake. This little person in the human body still expresses the lake. The consciousness that looks through the eyes is the lake, but because of the anchor of the ego, It mostly thinks it is separate, except for rare moments when you feel that connectedness. Question. We always see the Golden Lake, so can we go back to any time? Keep in mind that you cannot see the Golden Lake as something outside of you because you are the Golden Lake. The only thing that stops you is your ego, which is like an anchor weighing you down. The layers of experience diagram in the previous chapter is like a roadmap. It shows you how to navigate your emotions, your belief systems, and your thoughts to help you return to lake consciousness. Question. So the Vegans suppressed their emotions. Since love is an emotion, did they suppress it too? Yes, but they didn't believe that's what they were doing. Their love was very mental. Question. What is the origin of love? Can you define love? The origin of love is the golden light of the lake. It is you. You are that lake. The human concept of love is very different from the true experience of it. You usually believe love is triggered by something outside of you, but love really is your original state. When all obstacles to your original state are removed, only love remains. This is much like how the sun always shines but is sometimes hidden by clouds. Disowned human emotions, beliefs, and attachments are like those clouds. Remove them and only the sun remains. Thus, love is the primordial energy of the universe. It is not an emotion, only humans label it that way. As your species evolves, you will learn to feel love without any external stimuli. You will learn there is nothing devoid of love. It is the whole universe itself. It also is you. Question. There are many small and limited definitions of love. Most humans think love is only between partners. Love between partners, no matter the gender, especially in the state where you are being physically intimate, is a way that you can experience the primordial energy of the universe. If you drop your barriers, this is one reason for the sexual act. Older species such as the Pleiadians and others that have almost finished their incarnational cycles believe the act of intercourse is not as important because we feel that love between us all the time. It is more important for humans because it gives you the opportunity to connect with each other and reconnect with the universe. Question. How did the Vegans evolve? At a certain point in their evolution, the Vegans saw the split in themselves. They'd had the split for so long it was hard for them to shift quickly. Much like the Lyrans, it required self-observation. Actually, self-observation is one of the keys for all older species to facilitate their awakening process, as it will be for you. Because of their many spiritual practices, they had the discipline and motivation to make these shifts, but they did not happen quickly. By observing themselves honestly, they were able to see the split, and then they had to reaffirm their spiritual commitment in a new way. Remember, they originally thought that they were spiritually committed because they wanted to focus their energy internally, but they ended up splitting within themselves. As a result, they had to return to the emotional bodies and heal themselves from there. They had seen what happened to the Zetas, who were part of their genetic line, and they were determined not to repeat the same pattern. The Zetas. Within the Vegan lineage, one branch became extremely mentally focused. Their intent was to develop the mind and eradicate emotions, mistakenly believing emotions were a sign of lesser evolved species. This group created a very large split within themselves. They didn't really understand what they were doing, but convinced themselves that they were on the path of perfection. This is a civilization we have called the Zeta Reticuli, or the Zetas for short. As the civilization went through its developmental process, it became the people had problems. They were not able to procreate easily, and their planet became very toxic. Even their bodies became weaker. However, seeing these symptoms, they still did not recognize the connection between their personal and planetary conditions with the split they had created. They didn't understand that you cannot eradicate emotion. Trying to do so only pushes emotions deeper and creates conditions of toxicity, both internally and externally. Thus they continued moving forward in their process of perfection, nearly to the point of extinction. They became so focused on the mind, so limited in their linear thinking, that they could not see the obvious. Because the Zetas would not admit to the emotions surrounding their crisis, they became desperate. Searching for a solution to their species' problem, they reached out to the Golden Lake through their spiritual practices. The idea of the lake was somewhat theoretical to them, but because of their desperation, they opened themselves just enough to concede that perhaps there was something more than the reality that they mentally envisioned. In connecting with the lake, a group consciousness answered, the Founders. These beings play the role of architects of the whole journey of separation and eventual reintegration. The Founders communicated to the Zetas that in order to heal, They needed to reintegrate their emotional bodies. Of course, the Zetas did not want to do that. They really did not understand its importance. How did this reintegration with the emotional body happen? The founders brought humans and Zetas together to learn from each other and take the next step in their evolution. The Zetas have used some genetic material from humans who still have emotional bodies to help them rebuild and physically strengthen their species. More importantly, when a human and a Zeta communicate with each other, there is a tremendous amount of fear. From the point of view of the Zetas, humans are wild creatures and unpredictable. Zetas experience a lot of fear while not really understanding what fear is. When humans encounter Zetas, they too experience fear because Zetas represent the unknown, the strange other. These encounters triggered primal fear for both species. These interactions have been important for humans and Zetas because they allow both to confront their fears on a collective level. We have spoken about upside and downside. If there's an upside to the Zeta experience, it is that they have an innocent passion for their self-evolution, even though their passion nearly destroyed their species. Their innocent passion is very beautiful. However, the downside with the Zetas of this era is that their vision is often constricted. They rely too much on logic, reason, and linear thinking. They cannot see options outside their paradigm. That is why they nearly destroyed their species. The contact program between humans and Zetas had been going on for hundreds of years, but it accelerated from the 1940s to the present. This contact has been very important, as you will see. Question. So the Zetas created a hybrid race with the humans to benefit their evolution. In terms of a timeline, didn't a hybridization occur over a long time ago? Explaining this is a challenge because the Zetas work outside of time. For example, if you have a straight line that represents the human view of time reality, the Zetas hover over that line. They can go to any place on the timeline. They did experiments thousands of years ago and even more during the 60s through the 90s. Question. Why did it start in the 40s? It began at this time, anthropologically speaking, because when a planet achieves nuclear capability, everybody out there starts paying attention. So as far as the human timeline, it is very recent. If you look at the parallels, your planet is moving very quickly now towards space travel, so it was necessary. Question. It is hard to imagine being totally devoid of emotion. The Zetas were convinced they had eradicated emotion, but when they began their genetic engineering, they eventually discovered they hadn't killed the emotional body. They had just severed their connection to it. The energy field was still there. Question. What would happen if humans did the same thing? Most likely you'll go down the same road. If you look at probabilities, there's a timeline where that is exactly what humans do. It is not the strongest probability right now, but it is a possibility. So what kind of dynamics happened to get the Zetas to connect to the lake and see what was really happening? We mentioned this earlier regarding the Lyrans. When internal pain reaches a critical mass, the pressure becomes so great that it forces you to look for alternatives. Some you might not intellectually embrace. This is one reason for the value of pain in human reality and in the realities of your galactic family. Pain forces you to look outside your familiar paradigm. Question. Do the Zetas have male and female genders, and do they procreate? During the time when they experienced their species crisis, they couldn't procreate. Look back at the conversation we had earlier about sex and the importance of opening yourself during the sexual experience to be able to connect with the lake. The Zetas were so closed that the sexual act became robotic with no openness. That is one reason they were not able to procreate. Their expression of gender depends on the era of their evolution, but on the genetic level they have XX or XY chromosomes that don't really affect the physical being in any significant way. Question. So the mingling with Zeta DNA helped to create a quantum leap on the part of the humans. Yes, from our point of view, it's quite exciting. When contacts first started more frequently in the early 80s and 90s, humans had a lot of fear. We spoke with many humans at that time about this. We talked to them about the importance of using that contact experience as a way to work through fear. Now, a few decades later, the majority of contacts with Zeta are not fearful. This shows a quantum leap in which humanity has stepped through their fear on a very deep level. It is like an initiation before a species can travel to the stars. Question. Can you elaborate on using fear to evolve? This idea is based on the use of polarized energy. Fear and its opposite, love, form a polarity relationship. You cannot go back into the lake if you cling to a fearful paradigm. The energies are not compatible. To get to the lake, you have to pass through the doorway of fear. Returning to the diagram of the layers of experience, we mention the ego gate. Fear is one of the metaphorical soldiers standing at that gate. The ego doesn't want you to go back to the lake, the original state of oneness. It uses fear as a way to stop you. Question: is it a valid methodology to maximize fear in order to merge into the lake? That question is very vegan in style. Yes, it is valid, but it depends on the intention. There is a story of Buddha's enlightenment where he meditates under the Bodhi tree. Before he reaches enlightenment, he experiences his greatest archetypical fears and has to face them, including demons and all the projections of the shadows within. It is almost too much for him to bear, but he stays with the process, walks through the doorway, and is enlightened. This process is organic and cannot be artificially induced until a person is ready. The Essassani. Question: since you were talking about fear regarding the relationship between humans and Zetas, would you please talk about the result of that relationship, one of the hybrid races known as the Essassani? We were talking about the Zetas doing hybrid work with humans. They created many lines of hybrids, some known and some unknown. Some lines were weak and did not survive. Others matured and eventually went off on their own into the universe. The most famous is the civilization of the Essassani. The civilization of the Essassani is extremely important to humanity. It represents a possible future timeline for Earth. Genetically, they are part human and part Zeta, but what they also represent is a type of alchemy. We spoke of fear and love and how a type of alchemy happens, and everything is transformed when you allow yourself to pass through the energy of fear. This is why the Essassani species is so awakened. Their birth came from that alchemy of fear and love. This is why when humans listen to the channeling of Bashar through Daryl Anka, they can feel the power of that alchemy. It gives them confidence that they too can walk through their fear. Question: so the Essassani represent the future of humanity? Yes, Bashar has said that even though they are a hybrid of humans and Zeta, they also have their ancient history. We know this might be a little confusing for some humans since we said that the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s were the peak of this work. So how could the Essassani have an ancient history? The timelines are not parallel. When we said the Zetas hover above the human timeline, they could actually interject that genetic line at any time in the timeline when working with their genetic projects. From a human point of view, the line was inserted in ancient past to give the Essassani time to develop as a species. Question: so the upside of the Essassani is that they are an integration of love and fear? Yes, that is one upside. Another upside has to do with their qualities of integrity. This means their thoughts, emotions, actions, and intentions are all in alignment. That is, in a sense, a perfect model for a civilization, because what results is the creation of authentic beings. If we were to say there is a downside, we notice that from a human point of view, Essassanian solutions to human challenges seem too simplistic for many humans. The execution of the Essassani philosophy in a human reality is difficult for humans, and the depth of their philosophy isn't yet fully understood, no matter how clearly Bashar might communicate it. The Orions. To talk about the Orions now, we have to go back to Lyra and Vega. As we have said, these lineages have many branches. Some of the branches from Lyra and some from Vega joined together and eventually became the Orion civilization. For readers not familiar with the Orions, they represent the most polarized civilization that ever existed in your galactic family. The dynamic was threefold. There was a very controlling empire, much like if you imagine a dictatorship on Earth, but multiplied by 1,000,000. There was absolute control. The population being controlled struggled with victim consciousness. Finally, a secret group of resistance fighters called the Black League sought to free the Orion people from the empire. The word black is used to mean hidden. The intention of the Black League was positive, but in terms of polarity dynamics, they exasperated the problem. As long as they were two sides that continually fight, they will always stay locked in the polarized energy of retribution. For millennia, the Orion civilization was locked in this polarity drama. Their awakening happened in a very intense and unusual way, and had to do with the conception and birth of a very special being that they would call on Orion Christ. We mentioned how the Zetas were desperate and called to the metaphorical lake. The same thing happened to the Orions. In the darkest time, the Orion Black League priests became desperate, and they called out to the lake. The priest received an answer which had to do with performing a ritual to conceive a child with a priest and a priestess. A symbolic drop from the lake would incarnate in this special baby, untainted by the polarity perpetuated in Orion for millennia. The intention was that the energy of pure integration from the lake would incarnate, and the frequency could start to change in dynamic in Orion. This is a very unusual way to shift a civilization that really only works with a civilization in intense conflict. But even more deeply than that, it was simply a matter of timing. Energetically, the intense polarity had reached a tipping point, as all polarity eventually does. When they reached out to the lake, the dynamic was about to shift anyway. The birth of the Orion Christ helped the process along. It was a symbolic way to focus the energy on Orion's transformation. Regarding upsides and downside, we would say one upside of the Orion was their intense focus and passion. Orions never saw the emotional body as negative. Except for the priests, they expressed their passion in an uncontrolled way, almost to the opposite degree of the Vegans. They were extremely loyal and dedicated to their cause, and they experienced deep love. They can see how this state of being is the combination of both their Lyran and Vegan attributes. The downside was that their passion kept the conflict in place. They did not know how to balance their emotions. They could harness that energy for magical practices at times, but they couldn't see the larger picture. Question: how did the Orions eventually heal their polarity? We have found that the best way to describe this is with metaphor. Imagine you have two really powerful magnets, and the direction they are turned causes them to repel each other. When you put those magnets under the pressure of repulsion, it creates a new energy field, compression. Scientifically, you would call it a type of fusion. When you create fusion, it forces together two opposites that create a release of energy. The force of the polarity in Orion, through its massive compression, created an unstable energy field that generated a process of fusion. The story of the Orion Christ is a literal story, but the story of the magnets is a metaphorical one to illustrate polarity dynamics. Energetically, at the point of fusion, when a new energy source is released, it creates a torus field of integration. It was at that moment that the Orion Christ was born. The Orion Christ was the physical representation of this energy dynamic process. He embodied the energy of fusion, which is complete integration. Questions: it seems like you might die from that kind of pressure. They nearly did. On Earth, Israel is an example of this kind of pressure, but that is a very weak example compared to Orion. The pressure is extremely hard to bear. The pressure was held on the level of planetary consciousness, not just the consciousness of one person. Because of their level of extreme focus, they could bear more than perhaps a Lyran could. These types of awakening experiments have also been done on your world, such as with Jesus Christ. It did not work because human energy dynamics are different. Instead of helping to facilitate a fusion and subsequent integration, your planet instead created a religion in which many people died in Jesus' name, the exact opposite of his intention. Question: has the Orion Christ been to Earth? Think of him as a drop from the lake. All Christ and Buddhas are drops from the lake. They come out of the lake and return to the lake. You can't even say they are souls because they don't have an identity as such. They serve a different function. When they incarnate, they are very often misunderstood. Humans attach to them instead of understanding that these Christ drops are meant to remind you that you are also a drop, and that is your true nature. Question: what makes normal humans different from these Christ Buddha drops? Is it the size of the drop? There is really no qualitative or quantitative difference. They are drops from the lake, as are you. The big difference is that the consciousness of the drop incarnates with full understanding and expression of its true nature. This is your potential too, because you are as much a drop of this lake as they are. Since the lake is still learning about separation polarity, some aspects of the lake incarnate with little or no memory, and some aspects incarnate with full memory. From the bigger picture, the whole process, while simple, is perfectly balanced, like the most intricate machine. Everything always balances out. In times of deepest polarity, the greatest light emerges from the lake to remind you of your essence if you are willing to see it. As polarity begins its integration process, the light amplifies within all drops of the lake. This is what has begun now, and it is why so many of your Earth cling to the old paradigm of separation. A change as huge is frightening to many, but there is no stopping the process now. End of chapter.